Hello learners, and welcome to chapter 15, where we get to focus on the special senses, specifically the eyes and the ears. Now together, they're going to transform light and sound into electrical signals that the brain can then interpret as sight and hearing. So how are we going to kind of get all this started? Well, first, we do have to kind of go back to our understanding of the nervous system and, of course, sensory receptors. Now, in the nervous system, we already talked about that we have to have some type of sensory input, which we see as receptors. And then those receptors kind of go through an afferent pathway to the control center, which is going to be our integration center. And then finally, that control center is going to send a message through an efferent pathway to an effector that then will allow us to have some type of motor response, for example. And we even talked about how our homeostatic feedback loop can also be connected to those sensory input, integration, and motor output for the nervous system. But in chapter 13, one of the big pieces of details that we got to add in were the different types of receptors. So yes, we have a stimulus. That stimulus is going to basically excite receptors. And we have general receptors, meaning that they automatically have the ability through an afferent pathway and, of course, process through the spinal cord or the brain. And the general senses are what we normally see for a majority of the body. But then we also have those special senses. And those special senses are a little bit different because before you can just go from receptor to an afferent pathway, the receptor types are very different. They're not just general, they are special, right? And so, for example, with the eyes, they have special receptors like photoreceptors called rods and cones. And the ears have special receptors called hair cells that are going to help that basically send that electrical signal to the brain to interpret sight and hearing. So let's go ahead and start with our first understanding, which is going to be the eye. We're going to get into an overview of the eye, and then we'll go into the ear after that. For this lecture, it's going to be a lot about structure and function. So we want to make sure that we're using our visuals that are given to or provided for us in this lecture to help us as we go along. So when it comes to the eye, let's do a general overview. Where are the eyes? Well, if we're thinking of the skeletal system, we know they're in our orbital socket or our bony orbit, we call it here. And also we have our eyeballs that are going to be cushioned by fat. So that's one thing that we see there. Now, as far as sensory receptors go, we talked about them in general, right, when it comes to chapter 13, but 70% of the body's sensory receptors are in the eye itself, and we'll talk about those photoreceptors or those special type of receptors as we go along. And in chapter 12, we also talked about the cerebral cortex. Now, half of the cerebral cortex is dedicated to vision. Why? Because we're going to be taking in a lot of light, and that light, being able to change that form of light into an electrical signal is going to take a lot of brain power. Okay, and we'll talk about that as we go along as well. Now, one thing I want to talk about is when you generally talk about the eye, we usually start off with the accessory structures of the eyelashes, the eyebrows, etc. That's what we'll first start talking about. Then we're going to get into the layers of the eye itself. Now, even though we're saying, oh, there's only 3 layers, each layer is made up of other layers. So just keep that in mind as well. Then we'll start talking about the humors or the fluids that are surrounding the eye to help maintain pressure and cushion it and nourish it. And then we'll also talk about the lens, okay? And so that's how we'll kind of organize ourselves when it comes to the eye itself. Let's go ahead and get to the accessory structures. So here we have an eye. Of course, we see the eyelids, we have the eyelashes, and then again, we have our pupil here, we have our iris around it, and we'll be talking about each of those pieces as we go along. Accessory structures are outside or surround the eyeball, and their goal is to protect, move, or lubricate. So when we're thinking of protection, yes, we can talk about our eyebrows and our eyelids. We can also talk about the conjunctiva, which is going to be basically the membrane underneath our eyelids. And when we're thinking of movement, we have to think of muscles, because we know that muscles are involved with movement. And yes, there are some extrinsic eye muscles that are going to be surrounding the eye as well. And then we also must make sure that the eye is lubricated. Of course, if you've ever had dry eyes, you know they're very itchy and everything like that, so we have to keep the lubrication, and that's where we're going to have we're going to talk about tear ducts and everything like that as we go, okay? So let's go ahead and get into the eyebrows and eyelids. So think about it being a really hot day, okay, and you're sweating a lot. And I'll tell you, I sweat a lot, so I'm already thinking like, oh man, I'm already hot. And when you're starting to sweat, what do you think? What do you start feeling on your forehead? You start feeling a lot of sweat on your forehead. And does the sweat automatically go into your eye? No, it hits your eyebrows first. Sometimes you can actually just wipe the sweat off on your eyebrows, because guess what? The eyebrows are there to direct sweat away from the eyes. They're also there to reduce glare. They're also there to divert any kind of rain away from the eyes and help with facial expression. So that's the cool thing about our eyebrows. Now, of course, if you're profusely sweating, Yeah, it's going to start getting some sweat, which is going to be very, very salty into your eye, which can cause them to be irritated. Next, we have our eyelids and our eyelashes. So we have our eyelids here, and of course, from the eyelids are going to be our eyelashes. Now, the eyelids, whole goal is to protect the eye from what? Any type of injury. And you might wonder, well, why do we blink so much, right, when it comes to the eyelids? Well, we blink a lot because we don't even realize the amount of debris and dust and even bright light that could be coming at our eyes at once, right? So we need to make sure we're protecting them at all times. That's when we blink. And thus blinking is also going to help remove the debris, but also blinking can help spread tears across the eye. That's going to help provide some lubrication as well, okay? So it's all about protecting the surface of the eye, and of course, you're blinking to clear debris. Now, the eyelashes can trap particles, and of course, if you got some particles that are trapped, you might trigger that reflex to just keep on blinking when it's touched, and you're trying to get stuff out of your eye, right? But there's also, again, glands in the eyelids that are going to produce oil, and that's going to make sure the eye surface is moist and prevent any type of tears or irritation in those areas. Next, we have the conjunctiva, which is going to be this thin, transparent mucous membrane that's going to lubricate the eye with mucus. So not only do we have tears, we also have mucus lubricating the eyes, right? And so as you can see, if this is our eyelid here, see our eyelashes here, here is our conjunctiva that's kind of going across the eyelids as well. It's really underneath them. So every time you're blinking, yes, you're blinking, and that's going to help lubricate the eye with mucus as you're blinking as well. Why is that going to be very valuable? Think about it, okay? You want to blink and you don't want it to be basically stuck closed. You don't want it to be super dry to where it's so itchy that it's hard for you to open up. But sometimes you can get certain things that when you're rubbing your eye, inside of your eye, some folks say, well, you can get it from other people, and that's going to be pink eye. And that's what happens when the conjunctiva is inflamed, okay? So it's going to be itchy, it's going to be very, very red, and very contagious. And sometimes you can have that because people get urine in their eyes, and they can have different things in their urine that cause irritation, or you can get it by having something stuck in your eye that was never, the debris was never pushed out. So you can actually end up having irritation that way as well. And then it becomes itchy, inflamed, and red, and then the other things you touch or the other people around can also get pink eye, and the cycle continues. Think about elementary schools at this point. But in general, the goal is to just keep the surface of the eye moist. Next, we have the lacrimal apparatus, and this is just a bunch of components where the whole goal is to produce and drain tears, okay? Now, you got to ask yourself, what are tears? Tears are basically a dilute salt solution that including mucus, antibodies, other enzymes as well, that get drained into the nasal cavity. So yes, when you have one of those good old ugly cries, you're going to be having tears coming down your cheek, your nose is going to be all running and stuff like that, and you're going to end up producing a lot of excess mucus. That happens. I always do mine in the shower, so again, it's like easier to clean up, but happens to the best of us, okay? It's actually, you want to promote a good cry from now, here and then, because it also can release stress hormones. All right, so how does this all work? Well, the lacrimal gland here is going to be producing our tears. And what's going to happen? They're going to drain all the way until you get to the lacrimal puncta here. And the lacrimal puncta just means a hole. So yes, there's a hole towards the medial commissure of your face or your eye here. This would be like the medial commissure here. And that's where that lacrimal puncta is, so that you can release your tears here. Okay, folks? Another thing you'll see is from the lacrimal gland, it doesn't just automatically go to the puncta. It goes through tear ducts first, and then again to the lacrimal puncta, and then it goes through the caniculi and the lacrimal sac, all the way down to the nasal lacrimal duct. Okay, and that's where it's going to end at the nasal cavity. So that's where your tears are going. Yes, some is going on your cheeks and your face. Sometimes you'll see some, pooled around here. Sometimes you'll see it come from the middle as well. But the main duct that you see there is going to be our lacrimal puncta. Now here are all those components that come together to produce our lacrimal apparatus. Another thing I want to see here is that you definitely see that orbital fat. Remember, we already talked about the orbital fat just helping to, again, cushion the globe of the eye or the body of the eye itself. It's going to allow for easier movements and also stabilizes the eye inside of the bony orbit. All right, folks, now let's talk about our last eye accessory, which accessory structures, which are going to be the muscles of the eye, or the extrinsic muscles of the eye. And there's 6 of them. We have the lateral rectus, medial rectus, superior rectus, inferior oblique, and superior oblique. And of course, they have multiple actions, and there's particular cranial nerves. Yes, going back to chapter 12, there's going to be specific cranial nerves that are controlling these actions. So if you want to move your eyes from side to side, if you want to move them towards the middle, if you want to elevate the eye and turn it medially, I mean, there's so many ways you can move your eye, and it's all happening because of these particular muscles. They're like 6 strap-like extrinsic muscles. As you can see, they are attached to the eye here. We have a tendon that's going to be attached here. We also have our other portions here. And there's different views, a lateral view, superior view, and then here's the anterior view. So we can see muscle here, here, here. I'm going to slip up here. And remember, muscle there to help with movement. So the goal of that, they are going to allow our eyes to actually make the movement that we have. I'm like blinking my eyes and looking left and right now, just as an example in my head. But it's going to allow your eyes to follow moving objects, maintain the shape, and of course, again, provide that overall structure that we're looking for. We got that fat cushion that's going to help with that. And now to maintain the shape of the eye, we also have these muscles. Okay? So this is actually pretty cool because when we're looking at this, you might say, well, where's the origin? Remember, it's going to be the insertion portion that moves. So the origin has to be somewhere else. And then we'll notice that the origin is definitely going to be in the bony orbit. So here's all of our bony orbit portion. Here's all the bone part. And that's where the origins are going to be so that we can actually have those movements from left to right, top to bottom, medially, up, down. And actually, I've seen people who have some really cool eye movements. So it just depends on the person as well. But those are the main accessory structures that we want to focus on. Now we're going to be getting into the eye as far as layers, lens, and humors, or really the eye structure. Okay, folks, so I'll see you in the next video.